right, welcome everyone to the Pivot Table. We really appreciate you being here today. We're going to be talking about really customer centricity and getting started in your organization. And the first thing that you'll need to do when you do that is assess where your maturity is in terms of a customer-centric approach. Before we get started, just a couple housekeeping items. Today's discussion is recorded, so it will be available on the CDPa.org later. Also, all attendees are on mute for today's discussion, but there is a Q&A box in your lower right. So if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in there. Because we're only having a 20-minute conversation, we may not get to it, but we can always follow up with you afterwards. So the Pivot Table is a casual conversation amongst friends and colleagues about a topic that the Customer Data Professionals Alliance is interested in. And today we are joined by Melanie Allen, who is a founding member of the CDPa and an experienced marketing leader with a long experience working with B2C brands. She currently holds the role of SVP and Chief Marketing Officer at Brooks Running. And prior to Brooks, Melanie spent time at Starbucks, Procter & Gamble, and 3M. And joining Melanie in the conversation is Professor Peter Fader. He is a professor at the Francis and Pion Chia Professor of Marketing at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Say that 5 times fast. Wow. His expertise centers around the analysis of behavioral data to understand and forecast customer shopping and purchasing activities. He works with firms from a wide range of industries, and his focus is on topics such as customer relationship management, lifetime value of the customer, and sales forecasting of new products. He's also co-founded Theta Equity Partners to commercialize his more recent work on customer-based corporate valuation, and has multiple books that he's written as well. So after that introduction, thanks so much, Pete and Melanie, for being here. I'm going to turn the stage over to you so you can have a conversation.
Yeah, in that that opening slide there, it was very interesting that it said Professor Peter Fader, all in bold, but for CMO, it wasn't in bold.
Oh,
and so there's a point here. I think that being CMO is a very bold position. And especially with all the pressures and opportunities to move from just the product-centric thing to the customer-centric thing. So Melanie, talk about the bold things that you've been doing in that direction at Brooks and elsewhere.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I feel like customer centricity to me brings all of my history together. I started out as an engineer, so super analytical. Then I went into product development. So product development became product centric. And I would have said that's customer centricity. Understanding the emotional needs, understanding barriers to a product, how you solve problems for customers. In my mind, that was customer centric. And I think what's happened as I've gone into marketing is realizing that's only really one piece that's delivering a great product, but then there's all these other pieces to customer centricity. And so for me, it's balancing all of that, and all those things come to life in marketing. It is that bold element. It's funny, you look back at your career and all of a sudden you end up here and all those pieces just start to fit together. And I think that's the challenge of this role. The bold part of this role is you've got to see all those different pieces. It's a product for a consumer, so you've got to get value to them in that way, whether it's in the communication that you're giving them, a product that you're giving them, a service that you're giving them, but you got to also deliver value to the business. They're not going to keep investing and giving me marketing dollars. So kind of all that balance between you're just constantly connecting dots, and I think that's a lot of what we talk about in the CDPa is how do you connect all those dots.
Right. And first of all, in the same way that you just said, that everything kind of comes together and you can look back and said, it made sense that it played out this way. Everything you just said is a wonderful feeling for me too. Again, just for me, it's been different, just building a lot of different models, doing a lot of statistical and data stuff. But in some sense, I used to be glorifying the methodologies as opposed to the motivations and applications until they kind of woke up and realized that we got to give people purpose with this. And that's where customer centricity comes in. So it's kind of interesting that on one hand, we both kind of started the same way, being kind of nerdy, data-driven people who like to build things. Then we've kind of, I do the academic path, you do the marketing path, and here we are together again.
I know.
Is it just like the two of us, or do you think the rest of the world is coming around as well?
Oh, that's a good question. I do think, the rest of the world starts to come around, but what that means and having a common understanding about it and how you get there, I hope the rest of the world starts to come along.
So do you feel, though, that between your experience at Brooks Running and previously at Starbucks, again, as you wake up and have these ideas, do you feel that it's, that you're a maverick going against the tide, or do you see more and more folks who now understand and you don't have to explain it all to them?
Yeah, I think it's at the beginning of any kind of big transition. And all companies have been at different stages. It's interesting going through the CDPa right now with challenges that I'm hearing from different organizations. You realize you faced many of these along the way. And I think everybody wants to be customer centric. The idea of it makes sense. And so I think you do have, a lot of people talking about it. I hear, at Brooks, we're very, it's runner at the center. Everything focuses first on the customer. So I think the ambition is there. The idea of how you get there, even at Starbucks, you would say it was always about the customer experience.
Right.
Customer experience always came first, but then there are all these other pieces that come along with it. And so I think ambition wise, everyone's there. I think the work to actually get there across the organizations and across the company is where there's still a whole lot of work to be done in terms of how do you bring it.
I want to press you on it, Melanie, because what you just said, and I know that what you just said isn't necessarily what you think, it's a reflection of what others say and do. But you were referring in both cases to the customer in some singular way. I think you know where I'm going with this. That for me, and I believe for you too, that it's not about pleasing the customer. It's about understanding the differences across them, celebrating those differences, and saying those differences aren't just a nuisance for us to deal with, but are an opportunity to figure out who are kind of the right ones to double down on, and who are the ones to go, you want to buy it, take it or leave it.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think, I think product development and the product component of it celebrates those. You go down deep and you realize, wow, this customer is really different than this customer, and how I attract somebody who's not purchasing me today to your brand. I felt like I got a really good grounding of that when you're building products and realizing that not all customers are the same. The transition of that is now from a marketing and business perspective, having enough data and analytics to be able to segment them and be able to understand kind of where that value is. That's the biggest transition, where it's hard to connect those two things. I'll give an example at Brooks. I'm going to simplify it, but there's two really big groups of runners, and we know them emotionally. There's a group that they're not going to get out and run unless they have a goal. Like, unless I have a 5K, a half marathon, and something's forcing me to go out, or it's a routine, or I have to lose weight, or whatever it may be. Then you have a whole nother set of consumers that they just love the run. They love getting out there and enjoying the run, and it's the best part of their day. But I know that emotionally, I know that from a product, and we can design products based on what their need states are. But now connecting that into the size of prize, the audience, who we should be focusing on. And then there's lots of differences in between each one of those big segments. And so how do you make sure you're kind of balancing and getting enough quantitative data of your current customer base, and then other potential prospects, to be able to make decisions? I think that's where we have the biggest runway and the journey that we need to do. So I think on product, I understand, you see the value. No customer is the same. And then on the analytical side and the business side, you kind of get to, you can't be one-to-one, can't be one singular customer, but how do you make sure you're grouping the right groups? And how are you making sure you're making the right choices along the way? I think that's the hard part when you look at the analytics.
Let's make it even harder, because I think what you said is right on. And that's all with respect to kind of the data and the analytics and the understanding and the insights. But then there's the whole organization as well. And again, that's a big part of this whole customer centricity maturity assessment that we're collaborating on. So talk about how you get others on board with this, even if it's not necessarily part of their job, or so they think.
Yeah, I think one thing that's interesting is once we've started down this path, particularly at Brooks, you've started to realize that everybody has different pockets of customer data. And so tapping into that and talking to them about, but I also have this data, how do we connect these? And starting to connect processes together, because we're all interdependent. I think that's how you get everybody to the table, where you start to see, wow, I don't have this view. Can you help me on this view? And how do we learn from each other? I think that's one part. We have been using or just starting. I've just been starting to take the assessment tool within our organization. And what that's also done is it's allowed us, and it's early infancy stages, to have a common language across all of us to at least understand kind of where are we and where are the opportunities. So we get on, one, you're just always focused on the customer. And if you keep it there, everybody has their data points that come to the table saying, how do you connect? And so as long as you keep it customer centric, I think it helps bring the organization along. But then the assessment tool also helps us on where we are. One of the things that I think everybody's always hard on ourselves. You always think we're at the bottom because you see all these other opportunities. And it's like one of those ladders. I think of it in the cartoons, like you go up a ladder and then the ladder rung just goes back to the bottom, and you think you go up and it goes back to the bottom. And when we looked at the assessment tool, we kind of look back and we're like, we're actually not at the bottom. Like we're a little higher. We actually have climbed a little bit of the ladder, even though it's still really high up here. So that's how we've started using it, is common language across the organization and just keeping the customer, at the center and seeing how everybody plugs into it.
So get a little bit more specifics. I'm always just fascinated by the different ways that we kind of get people on board with this, especially in the areas where either they don't think they touch the customer very much, or they're kind of arrogant and saying we're very often the product development people who say, we're the ones who run this place, we're the ones who made it great. So getting buy-in, climbing that ladder, but cross-functionally. How's that been going?
Well, for Brooks, I'm lucky because we're a smaller top of the organization. So between our groups, we've got a small group. So I think that's one thing that helps, is picking a few people and getting them in the boat from an organization standpoint, and then just starting to do some things, like starting to unlock some of it. For us, product was probably the easiest one at first because they have a whole where testing database. So we've got all this data sitting over here, and then we have all this customer purchase data to say, how do we actually connect these two? How do we learn from each other? That was one component. The other component is making sure we've got the right product. We're an inventory heavy business, many are. Not having too much of it, not having too little of it is so important. So recognizing the value from getting the amount of inventory right, if we can get data and understanding about the customer, who's going to buy it, what do we understand, and the accuracy of that. That was the second piece that we really started to look at, to say, if we can drive value in those two places, how do we start to unlock that? So that's where we've started. I think there's a lot of other places, but that's how I think you just got to start small and then actually just do some things. You can talk about it forever.
So here's put you on the spot a little bit. Which part of the organization, which functional area do you think either is or will be the toughest to totally get on board with all this?
I don't know if we have a toughest to get on board, but we have a toughest to get a path to build it. And it is within a wholesale business, we don't sell much directly to our customer. So for me, it's more getting on board our retail partners to be able to partner with us, that it's not about owning a customer. We hear that all the time. I think it's just as much as the customer is I'm going to own the customer. Nobody owns the customer, and customer centricity is how do you help facilitate, customer and business value. And so figuring out how we work together on that, to me, that's the biggest opportunity, because we only see a very small piece of our customers. So we can only go so far. So for me, it's less about getting them on board, but more how do we break that barrier to partner with our retailers to really unlock the value.
Are there things that you do to kind of take some of these ideas of customer centricity and pay it forward, to help them understand the mission you're on, not just pushing products?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's where I see the value, which is if they succeed, we succeed. To me, it's about getting, a product in the customer's hands. We don't care where they buy it at all. We've partnered with some retailers where we've just even been able to squash some myths. Is an online customer always an online customer? No, they're not. Do they go buy in retail and then they just replenish online? No, not true. So we were able to do some anonymous data mapping and just mined it for insights. And then those insights unlocked opportunities for us to figure out how do we make sure that we're driving them back into store, etc. So absolutely, it's a lot about unlocking value for them, especially because a lot of our partners are small retailers. They're local running shops, and how do we help them unlock value in their space where they might not be able to have the capability to do that. We can bring that to them.
Yeah, which of course begs the question: who is the customer? Is it the runner or is it that small retailer? I mean, it's both, right? But if you're pressed on it, who do you turn to first?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I started, and I think Brooks for many years would have said it was the retailer, and they connected most with the retailer. And then over time, I've realized, wow, we got to connect with the runner, and runners in the community and our retailers. It's both. And being okay with it being both. It's just that, it's serving both needs.
Right. And speaking of both, an interesting question from Jason in the Q&A. What happens when you have customers with competing interests? Let's say, even valuable customers, and what they want, out of the product or the service with it might be kind of at odds with each other. How do you choose?
Yeah, it's interesting because especially a lot of our retailers, they're on the floor every day. They're hearing what runners want. They're hearing from runners. So they're sharing that information with us. And then they have a strong point of view, and then we have a strong point of view. And usually there's, I think always just bringing data to the table. That's a lot of times is, and bringing it back to customers and where you see that value within it, and giving them information. A lot of times it's wear test data or testimonial data, et cetera, that helps, or it's analytical data, it's research data, it's understanding the motion and the biomechanics of something to be able to convince them to do something. So we try to bring data to ground us. And sometimes you don't get there, sometimes you agree to disagree. And for us, we just stay with our conviction of, we know what's right for the customer and what we believe in. We kind of all hold hands and work from there.
So I know Jeannie's back on camera, so I just want to answer one other question, and I am genuinely interested in the answer. 2021 is upon us, and I'm sure you have all kinds of ambitions about moving this broader customer centricity agenda forward and moving further through the whole maturity assessment process. So what's the single biggest thing, when we reconvene a year from now on the customer centricity front that you really hope to accomplish in 2021?
That's a really good question. I think that's a good, okay, you stumped me, so I'm thinking while Jeannie's there, and I know we're at time. There's a lot. I think the one thing for me is we have more data than we've ever had in 2020. We have this influx. What do we do with it? How do we start analyzing it? And so I do think a lot of the assessment tools and figuring out where do we go next and how do we unlock the data. For me, at the end of 21, it would be having a clear roadmap of that and understanding how do we actually leverage the data, because it was just like this tsunami of data. And all of a sudden, you know, your systems can't handle it, our people can't handle it. You know, how do you now start to unlock it? So for me, it would be that we see the pathway to how we unlock that value.
That's right. And it's, I think, a very honest answer, and one, again, that's just near and dear to my heart, come full circle. So Jeannie Jones, back to you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Peter and Melanie. Really appreciate you having the conversation. Time flew by. It's great to see those real life examples. I know that the audience really appreciates that. For those of you watching, this series is a monthly series. It's just a quick conversation on Friday mornings. The next month, we'll be talking about navigating that complexity of customer-centric transformation. So very similar theme, but getting more into overcoming challenges and barriers. Started touching on that a little bit today. We'll have some other guest speakers at that point. So hope that you will subscribe at thecdpa.org. And I've also shared the assessment. And again, a big thank you to our pivot table talkers today. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you, Peter. Thanks, Jeannie.